us. Elias had always known the risks of deep space. There was nothing glamorous about it. His crew worked hard, salvaging wrecks and scrounging for resources in the forgotten corners of the galaxy. They weren't soldiers or heroes. Just a group of humans, looking to make a living off the debris of the stars. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills, and that was enough. At least, that's what Elias thought, as he stared out the viewport of their ship, the Resolute. They had come across another wreck. It wasn't unusual for ships to go missing or break down in the far reaches of space, but this one was different. It had been drifting for days without any sign of life. The distress signal was still running, but the ship's systems were weak, barely functioning. A strange feeling settled in Elias's gut as they closed in. Something wasn't right. "Elias, we're approaching," called out Vera, the ship's navigator. She was a no-nonsense kind of woman, sharp and efficient, and not one to show fear. But there was something in her voice that caught Elias's attention. He stood from the pilot's seat and made his way to the cargo bay. The others were already gearing up, Jax, the muscle, and Nina, the tech specialist. They were prepared for anything, or at least they thought so, but none of them were prepared for what they would find aboard that ship. The moment they boarded the vessel, the silence hit them. It was as if time had frozen inside. The corridors were dim, with flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The faint smell of something metallic and decaying filled the air. But there was no sign of life, no body, no crew. "Let's split up," Elias said, his voice steady, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Vera took the lower deck, while Jax and Nina moved toward the central control room. Elias, alone, wandered deeper into the ship's maze-like corridors, drawn to a door at the far end of the hall. It was strange. He could hear faint sounds, almost like whispers, coming from behind it. Curiosity led him to approach, and with a cautious hand he opened the door. What he found was beyond anything he could have expected. There, lying unconscious on a cold metal table, was a woman. Her skin was an ethereal shade of violet, and her hair shimmered like stardust. She was bruised and battered, her body covered in fresh wounds that oozed blood, but there was something undeniably regal about her, even in such a vulnerable state. Elias could see it in the way she held herself, even in unconsciousness, the calm, commanding presence that was unlike anything he had ever encountered. His heart skipped a beat. It was clear she wasn't human. Her features were otherworldly, with high cheekbones, sharp eyes, and delicate, almost angelic features. Yet there was a dangerous edge to her, something ancient, something powerful. Elias didn't hesitate. He moved quickly, checking her pulse. It was weak, but there. She was alive. "Vera, Nina, Jax," he called over the comms. "I need help, now!" Within minutes, the others arrived, and they quickly assessed the situation. Nina, with her medical expertise, took over the task of tending to the woman's wounds. She worked with practiced precision, while Elias stood at the edge, watching in disbelief. Who was she? How had she ended up on this ship, alone and near death? As Nina cleaned the blood from the woman's body, Elias noticed something that made his heart race. A strange symbol was tattooed on the woman's shoulder, an intricate design that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, and it sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't just any alien. She was important. "Who is she?" Vera asked, her voice hushed. She was crouched beside Elias, watching the woman intently. Elias shook his head.
"I don't know, but we need to get her back to the Resolute and figure it out."
"She's too important to leave here." Nina worked quickly, but it wasn't long before the woman began to stir. Her eyelids fluttered, and Elias felt his pulse quicken. She was waking up. The first thing she did when her eyes opened was glance at him, right into his eyes. There was no fear there, no confusion, just a deep, knowing stare that made Elias feel as if she could see right through him. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she blinked slowly, taking in her surroundings. When her gaze finally landed on him again, she whispered, barely above a breath. "You're touching the galaxy's queen, human."
Elias froze, his heart hammering in his chest.
Her words made no sense. The galaxy's queen? Was she delirious? She didn't look like a queen. Not like the ones he had seen in the holofilms, all glitz and glamour. But there was something about her. Something that made him believe her words. Before he could respond, the woman's hand moved, and she touched his wrist with surprising strength. Her fingers were cold but firm, and the touch sent an electric jolt through his body. She said nothing more, but her eyes held his, unblinking, as if daring him to challenge her. "What's your name?" Elias asked, trying to break the silence, his voice trembling more than he would have liked. She hesitated, then whispered, "Seraphina." The name sounded ancient, almost divine, and Elias felt the weight of it. This wasn't just some random alien. This was someone with power, someone important. "Seraphina," Elias repeated softly, testing the name on his tongue. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment as if savoring the sound of her name. Then she shifted slightly, trying to sit up. Nina quickly intervened, gently pressing her back down. "No, you need to rest," Nina said softly. "You've been through a lot." But Seraphina didn't seem to care about her wounds. She looked at Elias again, her eyes narrowed with something that could only be described as a mixture of curiosity and command. "You saved me. I owe you."
Elias swallowed hard. "You don't owe me anything." "I do," Seraphina replied with a slight smile, though it was faint.
"You do not know who I am, but you will, and you will understand why I am worth saving."
Elias didn't know how to respond to that. The whole situation was bizarre, and yet something in his gut told him that this wasn't just another salvage job. This was something far bigger, something that would change the course of his life, and possibly the entire galaxy. As they made their way back to the Resolute, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that Seraphina wasn't just an alien. She wasn't just some being from another planet. There was a power about her, an aura that made him feel like a mere mortal in her presence. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to bring her to him. The crew kept their distance, unsure of how to handle the situation. No one spoke much as they made the journey back to their ship, but Elias couldn't stop thinking about what Seraphina had said. The galaxy's queen! She couldn't possibly be what she claimed, could she? When they reached the Resolute, Elias didn't immediately move her to the medbay. Instead, he ordered the crew to set up a secure room, one where they could keep her under watch. There was too much about her that didn't add up. Too many unanswered questions. The woman who claimed to be a queen had already made an impact on him, and something told him that her presence aboard the Resolute would not only change the direction of his mission, but perhaps his very fate. But the question remained. What would Elias do when he learned who she truly was? The Resolute drifted quietly in space as Elias sat alone in the cockpit, staring out at the endless black of the galaxy. He could feel the weight of what had happened. The mysterious woman, Seraphina, still lay in the medbay, recovering from the wounds she had suffered. Every so often, Elias would find himself glancing back at the ship's interior, as if expecting her to appear, but she remained hidden away in her room, too weak to move far. He wasn't sure what to make of her. There was something about her presence that made him uneasy, yet fascinated. Every word she spoke, no matter how quiet, seemed to carry a weight that he couldn't ignore. He'd replayed her words over and over in his mind since she'd whispered them, but they still didn't make sense. She didn't look like a queen, at least not the kind of queen he'd imagined. There was no crown, no elaborate gown, no symbols of power, and yet the way she carried herself, even in such a vulnerable state, told a different story. As the hours passed, the crew worked to secure the ship and assess the situation. Vera, the ship's navigator, was constantly watching the scanners for any signs of danger. Jax and Nina kept to themselves, exchanging quiet words about what had happened. But they didn't ask many questions. They had learned long ago not to question Elias too much. especially when it came to situations like this. They trusted him to know what to do. But even Elias wasn't sure. He leaned back in the pilot's seat, rubbing his eyes. What had he gotten himself into? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft ping from his comms. It was Vera. "Elias, we've got a problem," she said, her voice tense. "You'd better come down here." The tone in Vera's voice left no room for doubt. This was something serious. He stood up quickly, moving to the back of the ship. When he arrived at the control room, he found Vera staring at the large screen in front of her, her eyes wide with alarm.
"What's going on?" Elias asked. Vera pointed to the screen.
"We've got a ship on the scanners. It's approaching fast." "I don't recognize it, but it's armed." Elias frowned, his heart racing. A ship in this sector? They were well off the beaten path, in a part of space few people dared to travel. The fact that anyone would be out here, especially armed, was troubling. "Do you think it's connected to her?" Elias asked, his voice low. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but, everything about this situation felt too strange to ignore. Vera nodded.
I think it's a possibility. We need to figure out what to do.
If they're after her, Elias didn't need to hear more. He turned on his heels and headed for the medbay. He knew the moment they made contact with the other ship, they would have no choice but to act. But first, he needed answers from Serafina. When he arrived at the medbay, he found her sitting up on the bed, looking out the small window at the stars beyond. Her long violet hair framed her face like a halo, and her presence, even in such a weak state, made her seem larger than life. She turned her head as Elias entered, and their eyes met. "I see you've recovered somewhat," Elias said, his tone cautious but curious. He had so many questions, but he wasn't sure where to start. Serafina gave him a faint smile. "I heal quickly. It's a gift of my people." She paused, her gaze lingering on him. "You didn't have to save me, but you did, and for that, I am grateful." Elias didn't respond immediately. He was still trying to wrap his head around everything.
"You're welcome," he said at last, "but you need to tell me more. I got this book."
Who are you, really? You said you're the queen of the galaxy.
How is that possible? And why are people after you? Serafina's expression darkened as she looked away, her fingers trailing lightly over the bedsheet. For a moment, Elias thought she might not answer. But then she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "My name is Serafina, as I've told you. I am the last of the royal bloodline of the Eltari people, the rulers of the galaxy for thousands of years. Our empire stretched across the stars, from the farthest reaches of known space to the deepest corners of uncharted territories. But that was long ago." Elias didn't know how to respond. He'd heard stories of powerful civilizations, of long-lost empires, but none of them felt real to him. They were just myths, stories told by the old storytellers. But looking at Serafina, hearing the weight in her voice, he realized she wasn't telling him a fairy tale.
"What happened?" Elias asked, almost afraid of the answer. She closed her eyes for a moment, her breath catching in her throat.
Betrayal, my own people turned against me.
They believed I was too weak to lead, that I wasn't fit to rule. They took my throne, my empire, and my people. I barely escaped with my life. Since then, I've been hunted by the Dominion, the faction that has taken control of my homeworld. Elias felt a twinge of sympathy. He couldn't imagine the pain of losing everything. Your throne, your people, your home. But something didn't add up. The Dominion? What's that? Serafina's eyes darkened with anger. The Dominion is a coalition of warlords and conquerors. They've spread across the galaxy, tearing down civilizations, claiming worlds for their own. They are ruthless, and they will stop at nothing to destroy anyone who stands in their way. They're after me, because I am the last living heir to the Altari throne. If they kill me, they will have complete control over the galaxy.
Elias tried to absorb what she was saying.
It felt like too much to take in at once. The galaxy, ruled by an ancient queen. The Dominion, a force so powerful that it could threaten everything. And yet, here was Seraphina, alive, weak, but undeniably important. So what now? Elias asked. What can we do? Seraphina met his gaze, her eyes intense. You have already done more than I could have asked. You saved me.
But now we must reclaim what is mine. I need your help.
Elias hesitated. He didn't know how he could help someone like Seraphina.
He wasn't a soldier, wasn't trained in combat, wasn't equipped to fight an entire empire. But then he looked at her, at the strength that still burned in her eyes despite everything she had been through. And he made a decision. Tell me what to do, he said. Seraphina smiled, though it was a sad smile. We will need to rally those who are loyal to me. There are still remnants of my people scattered across the galaxy, but they are few. We need to gather them, and we need to take back what is rightfully mine. Elias nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had no idea how they would do it, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to walk away from this. As they spoke, the alert sounded from the control room again. The ship was getting closer. It was time. Seraphina stood slowly, her strength returning in small bursts. She moved gracefully, despite her earlier injuries, and Elias couldn't help but admire her resolve. We don't have much time, Seraphina said. Prepare yourself, Elias.
The battle has already begun. Elias took a deep breath, his mind racing.
He didn't know what was coming, but he knew that whatever happened next, it was going to change everything. The tension in the Resolute was palpable. Elias could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. Every member of the crew moved with purpose, their eyes occasionally darting toward the medbay or the control room, where Seraphina remained under the watchful eyes of Vera and Nina. Elias had told them to remain alert, but the truth was, none of them really knew what they were preparing for. The ship they had detected earlier was getting closer. Fast. Elias sat in the cockpit, staring out at the stars, his mind racing. He knew that time was running out. The Dominion, Seraphina's greatest enemy, was coming. But why? What did they want with her? Was she really the only thing standing between them and total control of the galaxy? He didn't know the answers, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was already upon them. The ship that approached wasn't just any enemy vessel. It was a Dominion flagship, large enough to bring down anything in its path.
Elias, come down to the control room. Vera's voice came over the comms.
We've got more problems than just that ship. Elias stood up quickly and moved toward the control room, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. When he arrived, Vera and Jax were already at their stations. They both looked up at him, their faces grim. What's going on? Elias asked, his voice tense. That ship, Vera began, her voice tight with urgency. It's not just one ship, it's a fleet. And we've got an issue right here on board. What do you mean? Jax was the one to speak this time. Someone's been tampering with the ship's systems. We found evidence of someone trying to override our communications, our security systems. I think we've got a mole. A mole! But how? Who would do something like that? Vera looked at Elias, her expression hardening. It has to be someone who knew where we were going. Someone who knew Seraphina was on board.
The words hit Elias like a punch to the gut.
Someone within the crew was working with the Dominion. He had known that Seraphina's enemies were vast and powerful. But this was something else entirely. A traitor on his ship.
Who could it be? Elias asked, barely able to control the anger that was rising inside him.
Jax shook his head.
We don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. We're running scans, isolating everything. But the ship's systems are compromised, Elias. We can't be sure who to trust. the room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled in. Elias felt a chill down his spine. His crew had been with him for years: Vera, Jax, Nina. They were his family. He had trusted them with his life. But now, with the Dominion fleet approaching, the threat of a mole was the last thing they needed. "We need to act quickly," Vera said, her voice steady. "If we don't get the communication systems back online and secure, we won't be able to warn anyone or coordinate any defense. And if the Dominion gets close enough, we won't have a chance."
Elias nodded, feeling the pressure building. They were out of options.
The crew had to find the traitor before it was too late, but there was no way to know who it was. Any one of them could be working against him. His trust in everyone was beginning to crumble. "I'll speak with Serafina," Elias said, finally making a decision. "We need to know more about the Dominion, what they want, how we can stop them." Vera and Jax exchanged looks, but they didn't argue. Elias turned and made his way to the med bay. As he entered, Serafina was sitting up on the bed, her eyes closed as if she were meditating. She looked peaceful, almost serene, but Elias could see the shadows under her eyes. The weight of her past, of what she had lost, was never far from her. When she noticed Elias standing there, she opened her eyes slowly and met his gaze.
"Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with concern.
Elias hesitated, then stepped closer.
We have a problem.
A big one. Serafina raised an eyebrow, but she didn't ask any further questions. She had learned not to rush him. "Tell me." Elias sat down across from her, his mind racing. "The Dominion's fleet is on its way, and we've discovered that someone on this ship is working with them. We have a mole, someone who is sabotaging our systems." Serafina's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. "The Dominion? You're right to be concerned. They will stop at nothing to capture me. But you must understand that the Dominion does not just attack from the outside. They infiltrate. They turn people. If you have a mole aboard your ship, they've already started their work."
Elias felt his stomach churn.
He had suspected that the Dominion would be ruthless, but to know they were already among them, it was a nightmare come to life. "How can we stop them?" Elias asked, desperate for answers. Serafina took a deep breath, her eyes distant for a moment. "You will need to act swiftly. Trust no one, not even those closest to you. The Dominion's agents are skilled at hiding their true intentions, but if you know what to look for, you will find them." Elias nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. Who could it be?
Who on his ship could be working against them? It was a question he didn't want to answer, but it was the only one that mattered.
"Who can we trust?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Serafina looked at him with a strange intensity. "You can trust yourself, Elias. That is the only certainty in a galaxy like this." Elias felt a sense of cold determination settle within him. He knew what he had to do now. He had to find the traitor. He had to protect Serafina. And he had to protect the crew he had spent so many years building.
"Stay here," Elias said, his voice firm. "Go."
I'm going to find out who did this.
"No one leaves the ship until we know for sure who the mole is." Serafina didn't protest. Instead, she nodded once, her expression unreadable. Elias turned to leave, but then stopped.
We're running out of time. The Dominion's fleet will be here soon.
"We need to figure this out before it's too late." Serafina's voice followed him. "You're right, Elias. Time is the enemy now."
Be careful.
He couldn't. He had already made up his mind. He was going to find the traitor. And when he did, he would make sure they could never betray him again. As Elias made his way back to the control room, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The mole could be anywhere. They could be in the control room, hiding behind a screen, or maybe they were walking right beside him, pretending to be one of the crew. He had to be careful. No one was above suspicion. When he entered the control room, Vera and Jax were already hard at work, trying to restore the systems. The room was filled with the soft hum of machinery, the tension thick in the air. They all knew what was at stake. "We've got a few more hours before the Dominion ships reach us," Vera said without looking up from her station. "We need to figure this out, Elias." Elias nodded, his mind focused.
"Start with the security logs. Check for anything unusual.
Look for any unauthorized access points. Anyone who's been tampering with systems they shouldn't have access to." Jax looked up.
We're already on it, but I think it's more than just the ship's systems.
"If we're dealing with a Dominion agent, we might be dealing with someone who can manipulate people, too." Elias didn't respond. His thoughts were elsewhere. He had already begun to think of a way to test everyone. The mole had to slip up at some point. They couldn't stay hidden forever. It was only a matter of time. The ship was quiet. Too quiet. Elias sat alone in the cockpit, staring out at the vastness of space. The Dominion fleet was still out there, getting closer every minute. It felt as though time was slipping through his fingers. The traitor, whoever they were, had to be stopped. But every passing second brought them closer to an unavoidable confrontation. The crew had been working tirelessly, scanning for any sign of the mole and trying to secure the ship's systems, but Elias knew it wasn't enough. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. As he thought about Serafina, still in her quarters recovering, he couldn't help but wonder how much of this was truly his battle. Serafina was no ordinary woman. She was the last living heir to a lost empire, and the fate of entire worlds rested on her shoulders. But she was also more than that. She was a symbol of something bigger, something far more powerful than Elias had ever imagined. Elias rubbed his eyes, trying to push away the exhaustion. They had already done everything they could. Now, it was time to make a decision. He stood and headed toward the medbay, determined to speak with Serafina again. She was the only person who could give him answers, not just about the Dominion, but about what to do next. As he entered the medbay, he found her sitting up on the bed, her posture regal despite the bruises and bandages still covering her body. She looked up as he entered, her eyes sharp and focused.
"You're here," she said softly, her voice steady.
You look troubled. Elias nodded but didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked over to where she was sitting and sat down beside her.
She didn't look surprised by his sudden appearance. She had always seemed to know when he was close, even when he hadn't spoken. "We're running out of time," Elias finally said, his voice thick with frustration. "The Dominion's fleet will be here soon, and we're still not sure who we can trust."
I need answers. You need to tell me everything. About them, about your people, about how we stop this.
Serafina looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded, as if she had been expecting this question.
The Dominion is not just a group of conquerors, she said, her voice low but strong. It is a system of control. The Dominion's leaders are not just warlords. They are manipulators, skilled in bending minds and hearts to their will.
They rule through fear and division, and they have learned to infiltrate even the most secure places.
You mean, they brainwash people?
In a sense, they don't need to brainwash everyone.
They only need to sow enough doubt, enough fear, to turn people against each other. They use that fear to divide and conquer. And once they've broken someone, they control them completely. Elias felt a chill run through him. So we're dealing with more than just a military force. They're like a plague, spreading distrust wherever they go.
Exactly, Serafina said.
And they have agents everywhere, within governments, military forces, and even in the hearts of those who believe they are loyal. The traitor on your ship, it could be anyone. And we must be prepared for that. Elias clenched his fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. How do we fight something like that? How do we trust anyone again? Serafina's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. The first thing you must understand is that the enemy's power comes from fear. As long as they can keep us afraid, they will remain in control. But if we refuse to be afraid, if we stand together, we have a chance. Elias looked at her, his heart racing. But how do we stop them? How do we take back what's been lost? Seraphina's eyes sparkled with a strange light.
It's not just about taking back what was lost, Elias.
It's about creating something new, something better. The Altari were not just rulers. They were stewards of peace. We didn't conquer the galaxy. We unified it. We worked to lift the people of the stars, to help them grow and thrive. That's the legacy I want to restore. And it's something the Dominion fears more than anything. Elias nodded, his mind racing. I get it.
But we can't do this alone. We need allies. Bad.
Seraphina's gaze shifted toward the window, where the stars twinkled in the distance. I know where we can find them. The Eltari have allies, people who still remember what we stood for. We will need to travel to the Alcaris system, a place where old alliances were formed, before the Dominion tore it all apart.
Elias frowned.
The Alcaris system?
That's far. It'll take us days to get there, even if we leave now. Then we leave now, Seraphina said, her voice firm. We don't have the luxury of time, Elias.
Every second counts. The Resolute hummed as it sped through the blackness of space, heading toward the Alcaris system. The crew worked together, each person playing their part in securing the ship and preparing for what lay ahead. The sense of urgency was palpable. They all knew that the battle was coming, and that it would determine the fate of not just Seraphina, but the galaxy itself. As the ship neared the system, Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over him. The closer they got, the more he felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much bigger than himself. It was about standing against the Dominion, against the darkness that threatened to consume everything. When they arrived at the Alcara system, the crew was greeted with an unsettling silence. The planets were quiet, their cities and ships dormant. It was as though the entire system had been abandoned, left to rot under the shadow of the Dominion.
But Seraphina wasn't deterred. "We're close," she said, standing at the control room's window, her eyes scanning the stars.
The people we need to find are here, somewhere among these planets. We will make contact with them and they will help us.
Elias felt a surge of hope, tempered by the fear that the Dominion would find them before they could gather the support they needed. As the ship approached the first planet in the Alcara system, a faint signal appeared on the scanners. A transmission.
Elias ordered the crew to patch it through, and soon a voice crackled over the comms. "This is Captain Varric of the Vanguard," the voice said, strong and clear. "We've been waiting for you, Seraphina. It's time to take back what's ours." Seraphina's face lit up with recognition.
Varric, I knew you'd come.
"We've gathered what we can, but we'll need more." The transmission flickered briefly, and the voice continued. "We have allies in position. We've been watching the Dominion's movements. It's not just about strength, Seraphina. It's about timing. We strike when they least expect it." Elias could hear the confidence in the captain's voice, and it made him feel a little lighter. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe that they might actually stand a chance. "We'll be there shortly," Seraphina said, her tone filled with purpose.
Prepare yourself, Elias. The fight isn't over.
It's just beginning. The Vanguard was a sight to behold. A massive ship, sleek and powerful, built for war but exuding a sense of calm control. As the crew of the Resolute docked, Elias felt a strange mixture of awe and nervousness. They were no longer alone in this fight. They had an army of their own now, and they had a queen to lead them. As he stepped onto the Vanguard, Elias could see the men and women who had gathered to fight. They were from all corners of the galaxy. Different species, different backgrounds, but they shared one thing in common. They believed in Seraphina. They believed in her vision for the galaxy. Serafina stepped forward, her presence commanding, and the crew of the Vanguard immediately fell silent. She had become more than just a queen. She had become a symbol of hope, a light in the darkness. This is it, Elias thought to himself. This is where it all changes. He didn't know how the battle would go, but he knew one thing for certain. They were no longer running from the Dominion. They were going to fight. They were going to win. And they were going to restore peace to the galaxy. As Serafina raised her hand, signaling for the crew to assemble, Elias stood at her side, ready to face whatever came next. The Dominion had no idea what they were up against. The war for the galaxy had begun. And this time, they weren't fighting to survive. They were fighting to reclaim everything that had been lost.